Have you ever wondered why Jesus chose to tell this particular story when the Pharisees criticized him for eating with tax collectors and sinners? Of all the parables he could have shared, why this specific tale that unfolds in exactly 12 precise moments, like movements in a divine symphony? We're familiar with the basic narrative. A young man demands his inheritance, squanders it in a distant land, ends up feeding pigs, and eventually returns home to find his father running to embrace him. But there's something curious about this passage that most people overlook: the mathematical precision of its structure, revealing a deeper mystery about the heart of God. Picture the scene: a Hebrew household in the time of Christ, where respect for elders wasn't just cultural politeness, but sacred duty. The evening meal has ended. The family gathered in the courtyard as shadows lengthen across the stone floor. Then, without warning, the younger son rises and speaks words that shatter the peace like a stone through glass. "Father, give me my share of the estate that will come to me." Luke 15:12. In those 11 words, everything changes. The request hangs in the air like smoke from a burnt offering, heavy with implications that make the older brother's eyes widen and the servants pause in their tasks. This isn't a discussion about finances. It's a declaration of independence that cuts deeper than any sword. In Hebrew culture, such a request was tantamount to saying, "I wish you were dead." The inheritance belonged to the son only after the father's death, when mourning clothes were worn and dirt was thrown on the grave. To ask for it while the father still breathed was to reject not just authority, but relationship itself. The son might as well have struck his father across the face. The word for share, miros in Greek, carries profound weight throughout Scripture. It's the same word used for our portion in God's kingdom, our lot among the saints, our inheritance in Christ. When the son demands his meros, he's essentially saying, "I want the benefits of sonship without the relationship. Give me what's mine and let me go." But here's what staggers the heart. Jesus doesn't describe the father's shock, doesn't detail any argument or negotiation, doesn't paint the scene of a parent pleading with a rebellious child. Instead, the text simply states that he divided his wealth between them. The father grants the request that must have felt like death itself. This isn't weakness. It's the terrible freedom that love always grants, even when it breaks the giver's heart. The father could have refused. He could have disowned the son on the spot, could have called upon his authority as patriarch to silence such audacious rebellion. Instead, he chooses the path that costs him everything. He lets his son go. Notice the phrase, "He divided his wealth between them." The older son receives his portion too, though he hasn't asked for it. The father doesn't play favorites in his grief. Both sons receive their inheritance, one through demand, the other through generosity. Both are now free to choose what they'll do with the father's gift. The silence that follows this division must have been deafening. What do you say after your son has essentially wished you dead? How do you eat dinner with someone who has just declared their independence from your love? The wound is too fresh for words, too deep for explanations. Yet even in this moment of ultimate rejection, something remarkable happens. The father doesn't withdraw his love, doesn't add conditions to the inheritance, doesn't demand promises of future visits or filial respect. He simply gives, and he waits, and he watches the road for a familiar figure to appear on the horizon. The gathering happens under cover of dawn, when the household still sleeps and only the servants are stirring. Not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together, Luke 15:13. The Greek word synagogon paints a picture of methodical collection. He converts relationships into currency, memories into portable wealth, identity itself into something he can carry in his travel bags. Watch him move through the house where he was born, where he took his first steps, where his mother sang him to sleep. Each room holds a lifetime of moments, but now he sees only assets to be liquidated. The wooden toys his father carved with calloused hands, sold. The scrolls where he learned to read Hebrew, converted to coins. The family treasures passed down through generations, reduced to their market value. The servants whisper among themselves as they watch the young master pack. They've seen this before in other households. The restless son who trades his birthright for the illusion of freedom. They know how these stories end, but they dare not speak their concerns aloud. Instead, they helped him load his possessions onto the cart, their faces carefully neutral, their hearts heavy with foreboding. His older brother watches from an upstairs window, jaw clenched with emotions he can't quite name. Is it anger at his sibling's selfishness, envy at his apparent freedom, or perhaps a deeper fear that he too might someday feel the pull of distant horizons? He doesn't come down to say goodbye. Some wounds are too raw for words. The father stands in the doorway as his son makes final preparations. His weathered hands grip the wooden frame as if it's the only thing keeping him upright. This is the boy he taught to walk, whose scraped knees he bandaged, whose dreams he listened to under starlit skies. Now that same child is eager to disappear from his life forever. "I'm leaving now," the son announces, as if departing for the market rather than abandoning his family. There's a studied casualness in his voice, a deliberate lightness that fools no one. He's trying to make this seem normal, routine, when everyone knows it's anything but. The words hang between father and son like a bridge neither knows how to cross. The father could speak 1,000 things, warnings about the dangers ahead, reminders of how good he's had it at home, pleas to reconsider this rash decision. Instead, he simply nods and says, "Go in peace, my son." Even in his heartbreak, he refuses to guilt his child into staying. Love that compels is no love at all. The wheels begin to turn, creaking under the weight of a young man's entire life, reduced to sellable goods. Each rotation takes him further from everything he's ever known, but his eyes are fixed ahead, not behind. He's convinced that real life waits somewhere beyond the horizon, that home has been holding him back from his true destiny. The departing son doesn't realize, what he won't understand until it's almost too late, is that he's not just leaving a place, he's abandoning the one relationship that defines him, the love that gives meaning to everything else. Soon enough, he'll discover that you can gather up all your possessions, but you can't pack the sense of belonging that comes only from being someone's beloved child. The distant country welcomes him with open arms and empty promises, and there he squandered his estate with loose living. Luke 15:13. The word diasporpizo means to scatter like seed, but here it carries the image of waste, precious things thrown to the wind without thought for tomorrow or consequence for the soul. At first, it feels like freedom incarnate. No father's questioning eyes following his movements, no morning prayers to attend or evening conversations about responsibility and character. No older brother's disapproving glances when he sleeps past sunrise or returns home past midnight. Just endless possibilities stretching before him like an unexplored continent. The loose living, asotos, suggests more than mere partying. It implies a complete rejection of restraint, wisdom, and self-control. He doesn't just spend money, he abandons the very principles that shaped his childhood. Every boundary his father carefully established, every moral guideline lovingly taught, every spiritual discipline patiently modeled, all of it discarded like yesterday's sandals. The local merchants quickly learn his name and his spending habits. Wine flows like water at his table, and his new friends gather like moths to a flame. They laugh at his jokes, especially the ones mocking his provincial upbringing. They applaud his generosity while calculating how much more they can extract, and they praise his newfound sophistication as they lead him deeper into folly. Women find him charming, especially with his fat purse and naive enthusiasm. They teach him pleasures his sheltered upbringing never imagined, introducing him to experiences that feel like liberation but function like chains. Each night brings new sensations, new thrills, new ways to prove he's finally living life on his own terms. The festivals in this distant land never seemed to end. Where his father's house observed rhythms of work and rest, planting and harvest, celebration and contemplation, here everything is constant stimulation. The sun never sets on someone's party, and the party never lacks for entertainment. Sleep becomes an inconvenience, sobriety a handicap, and moderation a foreign concept. He learns the art of conspicuous consumption, how to spend money in ways that command attention and admiration. His clothes become more elaborate, his entertainments more extravagant, his gestures more grandiose. He's determined to prove that this new life suits him far better than the simple existence he left behind. Months pass in a blur of indulgence. He's created an identity entirely separate from his origins. No mention of fathers or farms, of Hebrew prayers or family traditions. He's reinvented himself as a man of the world, sophisticated and unencumbered by the provincial values of his youth. His new friends know nothing of his past, and he likes it that way. But there's something hollowing out inside of him, something that all the wine and laughter can't quite fill. In quiet moments, those rare times when the music stops and the crowds disperse, he catches glimpses of an emptiness that seems to be growing rather than shrinking. He pushes the feeling away, drowning it in the next round of festivities. The money flows out faster than he ever imagined possible. What seemed like an endless fortune begins to show definite limits, but he's too proud to change his lifestyle, too invested in his new identity to admit that perhaps he's been less wise than he thought. Besides, there's always tomorrow to worry about practical matters. Tonight, the party continues, and he intends to be its most celebrated guest. When the famine comes, it arrives like a thief in the night, stealing away the abundance that once seemed permanent. Now, when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. Luke 15:14. The timing feels almost cosmic in its precision, as if the natural world itself conspires to strip away his final illusions. The word severe, iskara, suggests a famine of unusual intensity, the kind that brings entire regions to their knees. Crops wither in the fields, livestock die in their pens, and the normal rhythms of commerce grind to a halt. What seemed like a land of endless opportunity suddenly reveals itself as fragile and dependent on forces beyond human control. His fair-weather friends vanish faster than morning dew. The same people who celebrated his generosity now cross the street to avoid meeting his eyes. The women who found him so charming when his purse was full suddenly discover urgent business elsewhere when he appears at their doors. His table, once surrounded by eager companions, now sits empty in the corner of establishments that no longer welcome his credit. The reality of his situation hits him like a physical blow. He's not just broke, he's foreign, friendless, and increasingly desperate. The identity he so carefully constructed as a sophisticated man of the world crumbles under the weight of genuine need. Strip away the money, and what remains is a frightened young man, far from anyone who might care whether he lives or dies. He tries to find work, But what skills does the younger son of a wealthy landowner possess? His hands are soft, his back unused to heavy labor, his mind unfamiliar with the practical trades that keep society functioning. He's educated, but not useful, cultured, but not competent, refined, but not resilient. The landlord, who once bowed obsequiously when collecting rent, now pounds on his door with eviction notices. The merchants who once competed for his business now demand immediate payment for past purchases. The society that welcomed him with open arms when he had money to spend now treats him like a burden to be shuffled elsewhere. Days stretch into weeks without a proper meal. He learns the hollow ache of genuine hunger, the way it gnaws at your belly and clouds your thinking. He discovers how quickly pride dissolves when faced with the choice between dignity and survival. The young man who once complained about his father's simple fare now dreams of the breadcrumbs that he used to discard. Sleep becomes his only escape from the gnawing awareness of his situation, but even dreams betray him. Night after night, he finds himself back in his father's house, sitting at the familiar table, surrounded by plenty and love and security. He wakes to empty rooms and empty stomachs, the almost unbearable contrast. The mirror reflects a stranger, hollow cheeks where there once was healthy fullness, threadbare clothes where there once was fine linen, desperate eyes where there once was confident swagger. He's become everything he once pitied, everything he once believed could never happen to someone as smart and resourceful as himself. Rock bottom, he discovers, isn't a place, but a recognition. The moment you realize that every choice you thought was leading toward freedom has actually been forging chains. The distant country that promised liberation has become a prison, and he holds the key to his own cell. But the door to freedom seems impossibly far away, blocked by mountains of pride and oceans of shame. Desperation drives him to the unthinkable. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. Luke 15:15. For a Jewish young man, this isn't just employment. It's the ultimate degradation, a violation of everything he was taught about clean and unclean, sacred and profane. The citizen who hires him shows no particular kindness or cruelty. He simply sees cheap labor and takes advantage of it. He doesn't care about the young man's background or his obvious unfamiliarity with such work. He needs someone to tend his pigs, and here's someone desperate enough to do it. The transaction is as cold and impersonal as a business deal, which is exactly what it is. The pigs themselves seem to mock his fall from grace. These animals, forbidden by the law of Moses, represent everything opposite to his covenant identity. They wallow in mud while he stands guard, their grunts and squeals the soundtrack to his humiliation. He who once dined at tables laden with delicacies now watches swine eat better than he does. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving him anything to him. Luke 15:16. The carob pods, koration in Greek, were considered survival food, the kind of thing you ate only when everything else ran out. Even the pigs turned their snouts away from these bitter husks, yet here he stands, envying their meal. The isolation is perhaps worse than the hunger. Pig herders in that society were considered ritually unclean, cut off from normal social interaction. People avoid him not just because of his paucity, but because of his occupation. He's become untouchable in the most literal sense, contaminated by association with unclean beasts. Each day follows the same soul-crushing routine. He wakes in whatever shelter his employer provides, probably not much better than the pig pens themselves. He trudges to the fields, fills the troughs, watches the animals eat food he can't have, and counts the hours until darkness releases him from this daily humiliation. Then he sleeps and wakes to do it all again. The silence around him grows deafening. No one speaks to him unless absolutely necessary. No one asks about his welfare or shows interest in his story. He's become invisible, a function rather than a person, a tool for keeping pigs fed and nothing more. The loneliness eats at him almost as badly as the hunger. His clothes, once fine linen, now hang in tatters. His body, once soft from easy living, grows lean and hard from manual labor and poor nutrition. His hands, once smooth and manicured, develop calluses and cuts from handling rough wood and coarse feed. He's being physically transformed by his circumstances, reshaped by necessity into someone he barely recognizes. The worst moments come when memory ambushes him without warning. Standing in the pig pen, he suddenly recalls the aroma of fresh bread from his father's kitchen, the sound of servants laughing as they work, the feeling of clean clothes and full stomachs and unconditional love. The contrast between then and now strikes him like a physical blow. Time stretches endlessly when you're trapped in circumstances you never imagined possible. Each day feels like a year, each hour like a day. He begins to wonder if this is how his story ends, if he'll die in this distant country, forgotten by everyone who ever knew his name, buried in ground that will never know the footsteps of anyone who loved him. Something shifts in the pre-dawn darkness of another sleepless night. But when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying here with hunger." Luke 15:17. The phrase "came to his senses," eis hiadon de elton, literally means coming into himself, a return to his true identity, after months of living as someone else. The awakening doesn't come through philosophical reflection or spiritual vision, but through the most basic human need, hunger. His empty stomach becomes his teacher, his growling belly the voice of reality, cutting through layers of pride and self-deception. Sometimes truth arrives not in grand moments of enlightenment, but in the simple recognition of physical need. How many of my father's hired men? The comparison that emerges from his awakening consciousness is devastating in its clarity. He's not comparing himself to other sons, other family members, other beloved children. He's measuring his current state against the lowest members of his father's household, the day laborers, the temporary workers, the ones with no permanent place at the table. Even they, men with no family connection, no inherited claim, no emotional bond to the household, even they have bread. Not just survival rations, but more than enough bread. Perisuetai artan. His father's hired servants live with abundance, while his actual son wallows in want. The irony cuts deeper than any sword. The memory of his father's household floods back with startling vividness. He can almost smell the kitchen fires, almost hear the chatter of well-fed workers, almost feel the security that permeated every corner of his childhood home. These aren't romantic reminiscences, but practical recognitions. His father's house operated with genuine abundance, real care, authentic provision. But I am dying here with hunger. The verb apolemi means to perish, to be destroyed utterly. He's not just hungry, he's literally dying by degrees, wasting away in body and soul. The distant country that promised life has become the instrument of his destruction. Every day he stays means another day closer to complete dissolution. The arithmetic of his situation becomes unmistakably clear. His father provides surplus for strangers, while his own son starves among swine. His rebellion has achieved the impossible. It has made him less than a servant in his own family, lower than a hired hand in his father's fields. He has successfully argued himself out of sonship and into something approaching non-existence. For the first time since leaving home, he thinks practically rather than romantically about his options. The distant country offers nothing but continued degradation and eventual death. Pride has become a luxury he can't afford, and dignity a possession he's already lost. What does he have left to lose by admitting failure? The plan that forms in his mind isn't noble or particularly spiritual. It's purely practical. He'll return home, confess his unworthiness, and beg for employment. Not restoration, not forgiveness, not a return to sonship, just a chance to work for wages and eat regularly. It's the most humble proposal he can imagine, and it feels like his only hope for survival. Yet even in this moment of desperate calculation, something deeper stirs. The very fact that he can remember his father's kindness to servants suggests that his father is fundamentally kind. A cruel master doesn't feed his workers well or treat them with dignity. Perhaps, just perhaps, there might be mercy available for a repentant son, even one who has fallen as far as he has. The decision crystallizes into action with surprising speed. I will get up and go to my father, and will say to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men." He rehearses these words like lines in the play, practicing the speech that might save his life. The preparation feels both simple and monumental. He has no possessions to pack, no farewell dinner to attend, no friends to notify of his departure. His entire life has been reduced to the clothes on his back and the desperate hope that his father might show mercy to a former son seeking employment. The journey that once required careful planning now demands only the courage to take the first step. The road home stretches before him like a ribbon of possibility and terror. Every mile brings him closer to the moment of reckoning, the confrontation he's been avoiding in his mind for months. Will his father even recognize the broken figure approaching the house? Will there be anger, disappointment, rejection? Or might there be something else, something he dares not hope for too intensely? He rehearses his speech compulsively as he walks. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight." The words feel both inadequate and overwhelming. How do you summarize months of rebellion, waste, and foolishness in a single confession? How do you acknowledge the depth of your failure without drowning in shame? "I am no longer worthy to be called your son." This phrase cuts deepest because it feels most true. Sonship implies relationship, responsibility, reciprocal love and care. He has violated all of these beyond repair. Whatever title he once held, whatever place he once occupied, he has forfeited through his choices. He returns not as a prodigal son, but as a former son seeking employment. "Make me as one of your hired men." This request represents the ultimate humility, a son begging to become a servant in his own father's house. He's not asking for restoration, but for employment, not for forgiveness, but for the basic dignity of honest work and regular meals. Each repetition of the speech makes it feel both more necessary and impossible to deliver. The words are simple enough, but their implications stagger him. He's preparing to confess failure not just to his father, but to everyone who knew him, everyone who watched him leave with such confidence and swagger. The landscape begins to look familiar as he draws closer to home. That bend in the road, that cluster of olive trees, that distant hill where he used to climb and dream, everything exactly as he left it, as if his absence was too brief to register in the natural world. Only he has changed, transformed by distance and hardship into someone his younger self wouldn't recognize. His steps slow as the familiar territory increases. Part of him wants to rush forward, to get the confrontation over with as quickly as possible. But another part wants to delay indefinitely, to preserve these last moments when reunion remains a possibility rather than facing the reality of whatever reception awaits him. The sun climbs higher as he walks, and sweat mingles with anxiety on his brow. Soon, perhaps today, he'll know whether his desperate gamble will pay off, whether his father's heart has room for mercy, whether there's any path back from the choices that led him so far from home. The road ahead holds all his hopes and fears in its dust and stones. The first glimpse of home stops him cold. There, silhouetted against the afternoon sky, stands the house where he was born, solid, welcoming, unchanged. But it's the figure on the road that makes his heart race with disbelief. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. Luke 15:20. His father is watching the road, not working in the fields, not conducting business in the house, not going about the normal routines of daily life. He's standing where he can see the horizon, scanning the distance as if he's been doing this every day since his son departed. The realization hits like lightning. His father has been waiting. The moment of recognition seems to happen simultaneously for both of them. The father's sharp intake of breath, the sudden straightening of his shoulders, the hand raised to shield his eyes from the sun, and then the impossible sight of this dignified patriarch lifting his robes and running like a young man toward the approaching figure. In Middle Eastern culture, elderly men never run. It's undignified, scandalous, a violation of the honor and composure expected of a household patriarch. Yet here comes his father, sandals slapping against stone, robes flying behind him, dignity abandoned in favor of something far more powerful than social convention. The word compassion, splanknitimai, describes being moved in one's innermost being, a gut-wrenching love that compels action beyond reason or social propriety. This isn't measured forgiveness or careful reconciliation. It's an explosion of affection that has been held back too long, now released without reservation or condition. The son tries to position himself for his rehearsed speech, tries to assume the proper posture of contrition and humility, but before he can arrange his words or his body language, his father crashes into him with the force of overwhelming love. Strong arms wrap around his wasted frame, weathered hands cradle his hollow cheeks, and lips cover his face with kisses, cataphilia, repeated, passionate, parental kisses that won't stop coming. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight." He begins his carefully prepared confession, but the words feel strange and inadequate in the midst of this hurricane of affection. How do you deliver a speech about unworthiness while being smothered with evidence of your infinite worth to the person who matters most? The father's embrace speaks a language older than words, deeper than explanations. It says, "You are my son. You are home. You are loved." The body language of forgiveness overwhelms any verbal confession, making elaborate apologies seem almost beside the point. Love doesn't wait for perfect contrition. It runs to meet repentance halfway down the road. Tears mix with dust and sweat and the salt of recognition. The son who left so confidently, so sure he could make his own way in the world, discovers that coming home means being undone by grace. All his defenses crumble under the assault of unconditional love. All his prepared speeches dissolve in the face of acceptance beyond his wildest hopes. The embrace seems to last forever and not nearly long enough. Time suspends itself while father and son hold each other on the dusty road, two hearts reconnecting across months of separation and oceans of pain. The prodigal has returned, but more than that, the father has reclaimed his child, and nothing will ever be the same again. The sound of celebration fills the evening air. Music, laughter, voices raised in joy. Now his older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. Luke 15:25. The Symphonia Kai Choros suggests not casual merriment, but organized festivity, a full-scale celebration that costs serious money and requires significant preparation. He's been working, while others have been celebrating, laboring in the fields while the household explodes with unexpected joy. The contrast feels symbolic of his entire relationship with his family, always responsible, always dutiful, always on the outside of the emotional center looking in. His hands are still dirty from honest work, while others are clean for the feast. And he summoned one of the servants and asked what these things might be. Luke 15:26. The servant's answer hits him like a physical blow. Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound. Luke 15:27. Your brother, not the prodigal, or the wayward son, or the one who left, your brother. The fattened calf represents more than expensive meat. It's the animal reserved for the most special occasions, usually saved for weddings or religious festivals or honored guests. The fact that his father slaughtered this precious resource for his wastrel brother feels like salt in a wound he didn't even know he had. But he became angry and was not willing to go in. Luke 15:28. The anger isn't just about the party, it's about everything the celebration represents. Unfairness, injustice, reward for rebellion while loyalty goes unrecognized. He spent years being the good son, the responsible one, the heir who stayed home and worked the fields and honored his father. Where's his fattened calf? His refusal to enter the house speaks volumes. In a shame-honor culture, his absence from a family celebration would be noticed immediately and considered deeply insulted. He's making a statement with his absence, forcing his father to choose between honoring the returning prodigal and dealing with the offended elder son. The servants scurry between house and field, probably hoping to convince him to join the festivities before his father notices his absence. They understand the social dynamics at play. This kind of family drama can destroy households and divide inheritances. The older son's anger threatens to turn celebration into crisis. Standing outside his own home, he can hear his brother's voice among the celebrants. The same voice that announced his departure with such arrogant confidence now mingles with welcome and laughter. Meanwhile, the son who never left feels more excluded than the one who went to a distant country. The irony tastes bitter in his mouth. The music and dancing continue without him. The celebration proceeds as if his presence doesn't matter, and slowly it dawns on him that perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps his years of faithful service have made him invisible, taken for granted, assumed rather than appreciated. Perhaps his father loves the dramatic return more than the steady presence. The question that burns in his heart isn't really about his brother, it's about himself. If this is how loyalty is rewarded, if this is how faithfulness is honored, then what has his life of obedience actually meant? The celebration he refuses to join becomes a mirror, reflecting back truths about his relationship with his father that he's never been forced to examine before. The father's emergence from the house signals that the crisis can no longer be ignored. And his father came out and began pleading with him. The same man who ran to embrace one son now comes out to pursue the other. The verb parakaleo suggests urgent entreaty, passionate pleading. This isn't a casual invitation, but a desperate attempt to prevent the family from fragmenting again. The older son's response erupts with years of suppressed resentment. Look, for so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours, and yet you have never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. Luke 15:29. The word serving, doleo, means to work as a slave, not as a son, a telling revelation about how he's experienced their relationship. I have never neglected a command of yours. The phrase carries a note of bitter pride. He's kept score, maintained a perfect record, followed every rule and regulation. His obedience has been meticulous, comprehensive, and apparently unnoticed. He's been the model son, and his reward is watching his father celebrate the one who broke every rule. You have never given me a young goat. The comparison stings because it's specific, not a fattened calf, just a young goat, something much less expensive and elaborate. He's not asking for extravagance, just recognition. a small celebration with his friends, some acknowledgement that faithfulness deserves reward. It seems like such a modest request. But when this son of yours came, notice he doesn't say, my brother, but this son of yours, creating distance and denying relationship. He's disowning his sibling as he confronts his father, making it clear that whatever celebration is happening, he wants no part of the family dynamics that make it possible. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, the accusation about prostitutes isn't found anywhere in the original story. It's the older brother's assumption, his worst-case interpretation of what loose living must have involved. His bitterness has colored the facts, making them worse than they probably were. You killed the fattened calf for him? The wounded cry reveals the depth of his sense of injustice. The most expensive celebration for the most undeserving recipient, while years of faithful service go unrewarded. From his perspective, it's not just unfair, it's insane. A complete inversion of how justice should work. The father listens to this outpouring of resentment without interruption, without defense, without anger. He lets his son empty his heart of years of accumulated grievance, provides space for wounds that have been festering in silence. Sometimes love means absorbing accusations even when they're unfair or incomplete. The confrontation takes place outside the house, with celebration continuing inside. This geography matters. The father has left his own party to pursue his angry son, has stepped away from joy to address pain. He's willing to risk the success of one relationship to repair another. The night air carries the sound of continued festivity while father and son face each other in tense dialogue. Two different understandings of family, love, and justice clash in the darkness. The older son demands fairness, the father offers grace. One wants recognition, the other gives restoration. The conversation that follows will determine whether this family survives or fragments forever. The father's response comes soft and tender, addressing not the accusations, but the heart behind them. Son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. Luke 15:31. The word son, teknon, carries deep affection, not the formal title of heir, but the intimate address of beloved child. He's not defending his actions, he's revealing his heart. You have always been with me. The phrase acknowledges what the older son apparently couldn't see. His presence has been precious, his faithfulness treasured, his constancy a source of daily joy. The father hasn't taken his loyalty for granted. He simply expressed his appreciation differently than the son expected. All that is mine is yours. This isn't a promise for the future, but a statement about present reality. Everything the father possesses already belongs to the faithful son. The inheritance isn't earned through perfect behavior. It's given through relationship. The older son has always had access to everything, including the authority to kill a goat for his own celebration. The revelation cuts deeper than any rebuke. The older son has been living like a slave in his own home, working for wages that were never necessary, earning love that was already freely given. His resentment stems not from his father's stinginess, but from his own misunderstanding of how the household operates. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has come to life again, and was lost and has been found. Luke 15:32. The word had to, ede, suggests divine necessity, not merely appropriateness, but cosmic requirement. Some moments demand celebration, regardless of past behavior or future concerns. This brother of yours. The father gently corrects the older son's attempt to create distance. The prodigal isn't just this son of yours, but this brother of yours. Family relationships aren't dissolved by geographical distance or moral failure. The bonds that matter most survive even the worst storms. Was dead and has come to life again. The language of resurrection permeates the Father's explanation. This isn't just a homecoming, but a return from the grave, a restoration from non-existence to life. When someone you love disappears completely, their return feels like witnessing a miracle. Was lost and has been found. The passive voice suggests forces beyond human control. The Son didn't just lose his way. He was lost in the comprehensive sense that includes confusion, separation, and spiritual disorientation. His recovery wasn't just geographic, but existential, a complete restoration of identity and relationship. The Father's words reveal a heart that never stopped loving either son, never stopped hoping for reconciliation, never stopped believing in the possibility of restoration. He hasn't chosen one son over another. He simply responded to their different needs with appropriate grace. The explanation carries no condemnation of the older son's anger, no dismissal of his concerns, no minimizing of his faithful years of service. Instead, it offers a different way of seeing, a perspective that makes room for both justice and mercy, both reward and grace, both celebration and continued relationship. And there, the story stops. No resolution, no epilogue, no tidy ending that satisfies our need for closure. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has come to life again, and was lost and has been found. Luke 15:32. The Father's words hang in the night air, and Jesus leaves us standing outside the house with the older brother, forced to make our own choice. Will the older son accept his father's explanation and join the celebration? Will he continue to nurse his resentment and remain outside? Will he finally understand that his father's heart is big enough for both sons? The love multiplied isn't love diminished. The parable refuses to tell us, and that refusal is itself the point. The silence that follows the Father's words becomes a mirror for every listener. Jesus has crafted a story with two possible endings, forcing every heart to reveal its true condition. Do you identify with the younger son who needs grace, or the older son who struggles with grace given to others? Do you celebrate restoration or resent it? The genius of the unfinished ending lies in its eternal relevance. Every day we're confronted with the same choice the older brother faces. Someone receives mercy they haven't earned. Someone gets a second chance they don't deserve. Someone experiences restoration while we've been faithful all along. What will our response be? The celebration continues inside the house. We can still hear the music, still sense the joy, still feel the warmth of reunion and love. But the door remains open. The invitation still stands. The Father still waits for his other son to choose celebration over resentment, grace over justice, love over law. Perhaps that's why Jesus structured this parable in 12 precise movements, because it mirrors the complete cycle of human experience with God. We all make demands that break relationship. We all journey to distant countries of our own making. We all waste the gifts we've been given. We all face famines that drive us to desperation. We all find ourselves in places we never thought we'd be. But we also all have the opportunity to come to our senses, to remember the abundance of our Father's house, to make the journey home with rehearsed speeches of repentance. And we all face the staggering reality of a God who runs toward prodigals, who celebrates returns, who offers grace beyond our wildest hopes. Yet the parable asks more of us than recognizing our need for grace. It challenges us to have the Father's heart toward others, to celebrate restoration rather than resent it, to run toward returning prodigals rather than list their failures, to offer the fattened calf rather than grudgingly give the young goat. The older brother's choice remains our choice. The music still plays, the feast still waits, the Father still pleads. Every act of forgiveness we witness, every second chance someone receives, every celebration of restoration becomes another opportunity to respond like the Father or react like the older son. The distant country still calls to every heart that thinks freedom means independence from love. The Father still watches the horizon for returning children. The feast still celebrates every homecoming. And the question still hangs in the air, as urgent today as it was 2,000 years ago. Where do you find yourself in this unfinished story? And what will you choose when the music starts again? Days after hearing the parable of the two sons in their father's heart, the crowds still lingered around Jesus, hungry for more truth. But there was something different about the way he looked at them now, as if he could see their restless searching, their spiritual wandering, the emptiness that religious duty couldn't quite fill. "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field," he began, and immediately the atmosphere shifted. This wasn't going to be another story about family dynamics or moral choices. This was going to cut deeper, to the very core of what it means to discover something that changes everything about how you see life itself. Picture the man in Jesus' story, not unlike any of us, really. He wakes each morning to the same routine, follows the same paths, performs the same tasks that filled yesterday and will likely fill tomorrow. There's nothing particularly wrong with his life, but there's nothing particularly right about it either. He exists more than he lives, functions more than he flourishes. What strikes you about this man isn't his obvious rebellion like the prodigal son or his rigid resentment like the older brother. It's his emptiness, the hollow echo of a life lived without discovering its true purpose. He's not running away from anything or staying angry about anything. He's just there, moving through days that blur together in their predictable sameness. But here's what makes this parable so different from the one Jesus just told. This man doesn't know he's lost. The prodigal son eventually came to his senses and recognized his need. This man hasn't even realized there's something missing. He's sleepwalking through existence, unaware that treasure lies buried just beneath the surface of his ordinary world. The tragedy isn't that he's rebellious or resentful, it's that he's resigned. He's accepted the emptiness as normal, the routine as inevitable, the spiritual poverty as simply the way life is. He's never imagined that extraordinary purpose might be hidden in ordinary places, waiting to be discovered by someone willing to dig deeper than surface appearances. His friends see him as stable, reliable, perhaps even enviable in his consistency. He pays his bills, keeps his commitments, causes no trouble for anyone. From the outside, his life looks successful enough, but inside, there's a question he's never quite been able to silence. Is this all there is? The question haunts him in quiet moments, when he's walking familiar roads, when work is finished and evening settles, when he lies awake at night staring at shadows on the ceiling. Something feels missing, but he can't identify what. Something feels incomplete, but he doesn't know where to look for the missing piece. What he doesn't realize is that his restlessness isn't a problem to be solved, but a gift to be treasured. That emptiness isn't evidence of failure, but preparation for discovery. That sense of something missing isn't a curse, but a compass, pointing toward a treasure more valuable than anything he's ever imagined possible. In a certain region where olive groves stretched toward distant hills, where ordinary farmers worked ordinary soil with ordinary expectations, he found himself walking a path he'd never taken before. The fields belonged to someone else, not through any deliberate trespassing, but through the kind of wandering that happens when routine finally becomes unbearable and your feet seek unfamiliar ground. There was nothing remarkable about this field, Nothing that would catch a traveler's eye or make a merchant pause to investigate. The soil looked much like any other soil, the boundaries marked by the same kinds of stone walls that divided 1,000 other properties. If anything, it seemed less promising than the lands he knew. Perhaps that's why it was available for purchase. Perhaps that's why its current owner hadn't developed it more aggressively. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across furrows left by someone else's plow, creating patterns of light and darkness that shifted with each cloud passing overhead. Wheat stubble from the previous harvest dotted the ground like golden memories of abundance, but nothing here suggested hidden wealth or unexpected possibility. He walked slowly, not because he was searching for anything in particular, but because for the first time in months, perhaps years, he had nowhere urgent to be. No appointment waiting, no task demanding immediate attention, no routine calling him back to familiar obligations. The freedom felt strange, almost uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. Birds wheeled overhead, their calls mixing with the distant sound of someone else's sheep, someone else's work, someone else's life, proceeding according to plan. The normalcy of it all should have been comforting, but instead it emphasized his own sense of displacement, his feeling of being a visitor in his own existence. Still, there was something peaceful about this field, something that invited lingering despite its apparent ordinariness. Perhaps it was the way the wind moved through the remaining stalks, creating whispers he couldn't quite interpret. Perhaps it was the gentle slope of the land, the way it seemed to cradle visitors rather than hurry them along. He found himself thinking about the parables Jesus had been telling, stories about seeds and soil, about things hidden and revealed, about kingdoms that looked nothing like what people expected. Could significance be hiding in places this unremarkable? Could treasure be buried beneath surfaces this plain? The thought seemed almost ridiculous. This was just a field, just dirt and stones and the remnants of someone else's crop. Yet something kept him walking, kept him looking, kept him hoping that maybe, just maybe, there was more here than met the eye. A strange peace settled over him as he wandered, as if the land itself was offering him something he hadn't known he needed. Not answers exactly, but the space to ask better questions. Not direction exactly, but permission to explore. Not purpose exactly, but the possibility that purpose might be closer than he'd ever dared to imagine. Even so, he had no idea that with his very next step, everything was about to change forever. Suddenly, his foot caught on something hidden beneath the earth. Not a stone or root, but something harder, smoother, deliberate in its placement. The stumble sent him sprawling forward, hands hitting soil that felt different somehow, more giving, as if it had been disturbed and carefully replaced not too long ago. What happened next defied every expectation of an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary field. As his hands pressed into the earth to steady himself, his fingers brushed against something that didn't belong, something that made his heart skip and his breath catch in his throat. A corner of metal, green with age but unmistakably crafted, protruded just enough to catch the failing light. The practical part of his mind insisted this was probably nothing, a piece of old farming equipment, a discarded tool, debris from some long-forgotten construction project. But his fingers, now working with desperate urgency to clear away the soil, told a different story. This was intentional. This was preserved. This was significant. Layer by layer, handful by handful, the object revealed itself. First a corner, then an edge, then the growing realization that this wasn't just a single item, but a container, a box, a chest, something designed to hold rather than simply to be. His heart hammered against his ribs as more of the shape emerged from its earthen hiding place. The metal, though tarnished by time, showed signs of careful craftsmanship. Intricate designs etched along the visible surfaces suggested this wasn't the possession of a poor farmer or common laborer. This belonged to someone who understood value, someone who had a reason to hide wealth where others would never think to look. Therefore, he found himself glancing around the field, suddenly aware that discovery made him vulnerable. Was he alone? Had anyone seen him stumble? Did anyone else know about this secret buried beneath such unremarkable ground? The treasure, for surely that's what this was, had remained hidden for who knows how long. The last thing he wanted was to become careless now. His hands shook as he worked to uncover more of the container. With each scoop of soil, the magnitude of his discovery became clearer. This wasn't just a small cache of coins or a few pieces of jewelry. This was substantial, significant, life-changing. The kind of find that transformed beggars into princes and turned peasants into landowners. The failing light made his work more difficult, but also provided cover for his activities. Shadows that had seemed merely poetic moments before now became allies, hiding his movements from any casual observer. He worked with the focused intensity of someone who knows that opportunity comes disguised as ordinary moments. When he finally had enough of the container exposed to glimpse its contents, his breath caught entirely. Gold, not just flakes or small coins, but substantial pieces that caught and reflected the last rays of sunlight like trapped stars. Precious stones that seemed to hold light even in the gathering darkness. Wealth beyond his wildest calculations. With this discovery, he understood that his life had just been divided into two distinct periods, before this moment and after it. Everything that felt empty and purposeless about his existence suddenly made sense. It had all been preparation for this discovery, this stumble into destiny, this moment when the ordinary revealed itself to be extraordinary beyond imagination. It was he who first understood the true magnitude of what lay before him. Not just wealth, but transformation. Not just treasure, but the answer to every restless night, every empty morning, every question about purpose that had haunted his ordinary existence. The chest before him wasn't simply full of gold and precious stones. It was full of possibility, full of future, full of life as he had never dared to imagine it. The initial shock gave way to a deeper recognition, one that sent tremors through his entire understanding of reality. This was an accidental abundance that had somehow fallen into his lap. This was intentional treasure, carefully hidden by someone who understood its value, deliberately placed in this unremarkable field by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. Thus, as he knelt in the growing darkness beside his discovery, a profound truth began to dawn on him. The emptiness he had felt, the restlessness that had driven him to wander unfamiliar paths, the vague sense that something was missing from his life, none of it had been meaningless. It had all been preparation, a divine orchestration that had led him to this exact spot at this exact moment. The chest before him seemed to glow in the fading light, but he knew the radiance came not from any external source, but from the recognition burning within his own heart. This was what he had been searching for, without knowing he was searching. This was what his soul had been crying out for during all those sleepless nights when he stared at the ceiling and wondered if there was more to existence than the endless cycle of work and rest. Every detail of his discovery felt pregnant with meaning. The way he had stumbled, not through clumsiness, but through some invisible guidance. The way the metal had caught the light at just the right angle to capture his attention. The way his hands had known exactly where to dig, as if they were following a map written in his very DNA. He thought about all the times he had walked past fields just like this one, never suspecting that treasure might lie buried beneath their mundane surfaces. How many opportunities had he missed? How many moments of potential discovery had slipped by because he was too focused on familiar paths to explore new territory? But there was no regret in these thoughts, only wonder. Because somehow, in the mysterious economy of divine timing, he had arrived at the right place at precisely the right moment. The treasure had waited for him, hidden but not lost, buried but not forgotten, secret but without purpose. The weight of what this meant for his future pressed down on him like a physical force. This wasn't just about money, though the monetary value was staggering. This was about identity, about purpose, about finally understanding why he had felt so displaced in his ordinary life. He hadn't been meant for ordinary. He had been meant for this, for discovery, for wonder, for the kind of joy that transforms everything it touches. The darkness was settling around him now, but he felt more illuminated than he ever had in broad daylight. The treasure before him had become a mirror, reflecting back not just his face, but his true self, the self that had been waiting all along for this moment of recognition, this instant when everything hidden would be revealed. Since then, nothing would ever look the same. The field, the path that had brought him here, the very air he breathed, all of it had been transformed by the simple act of discovery. He was still the same man who had wandered into this field hours ago, but he was also completely different, remade by the revelation that extraordinary treasure can hide in the most ordinary places. The next morning brought the crushing weight of knowledge that couldn't be shared. He woke to the same sun rising over the same landscape, but everything felt different now, charged with secret significance, heavy with hidden potential. The treasure lay reburied where he had found it, covered again with soil and carefully disguised, but its presence burned in his consciousness like a constant flame. Walking through the marketplace where he had shopped countless times before, he felt like an actor playing a role. Conversations about weather and crops and local gossip swirled around him, but he could barely focus on the words. His mind kept drifting to that field, to the weight of gold in his hands, to the impossible reality of what he had discovered. However, the hardest part wasn't just keeping the secret, it was the growing anxiety that accompanied it. What if someone else stumbled across the treasure as he had? What if the current owner of the field decided to plow deeper or plant a different crop? What if his carefully replaced soil looked different to a trained eye, betraying the fact that the earth had been disturbed? Sleep became elusive, interrupted by dreams of loss and waking fears of discovery. He found himself making excuses to walk past the field, checking from a distance to ensure that nothing had changed, that no one else was showing unusual interest in that particular patch of ground. Each visit brought relief, but also renewed anxiety about the next time he would be able to check. His friends began to notice changes in his behavior, the distracted responses, the frequent glances toward the horizon, the way he seemed to be listening to conversations happening in his own mind rather than the ones occurring around him. "Are you feeling well? You seem different lately." Their concern only increased his burden, adding the weight of deception to the weight of secrecy. The treasure had given him something he had always longed for, a sense of purpose, a reason for excitement, a future filled with possibility. But it had also taken something away, the simple peace of ignorance, The comfortable routine of days without life-changing secrets, the easy sleep of someone with nothing extraordinary to hide. From that point forward, every decision became filtered through the lens of his discovery. Should he continue his regular routines to avoid suspicion, or would that make him seem too normal in contrast to his inner excitement? Should he begin making subtle inquiries about the field's availability, or would that draw unwanted attention to his interest in that particular property? The irony wasn't lost on him. He had found the answer to his emptiness, but that answer had created a different kind of emptiness, the hollow anxiety of someone who has everything to gain and everything to lose. The treasure that promised to fill the void in his life had taken a new void, one shaped like fear and secrecy and the crushing responsibility of protecting a secret that could change everything. Yet, even in his anxiety, he knew he wouldn't trade this burden for his previous emptiness. The treasure was real, the possibility was real, and the future it promised was worth whatever sleepless nights and worried days lay between discovery and possession. The secret was heavy, but it was a weight he would gladly carry until he could transform possibility into reality. Meanwhile, practical considerations began to assert themselves with relentless persistence. How much would the field cost? What would the owner want for this seemingly unremarkable piece of land? The questions that had seemed distant and theoretical during the first flush of discovery now demanded urgent, specific answers. He began making careful inquiries, approaching the subject with the studied casualness of someone with only passing interest. That field by the olive grove, he mentioned to merchants who might know such things. I wonder what land like that might be worth these days. The conversations felt like elaborate dances, each word chosen to convey curiosity without betraying desperate need. As a result of his discreet investigation, the numbers began to take shape, and they were staggering. The field would cost more than he had, more than he could borrow through conventional means, more than he could earn in years of ordinary work. To purchase that land, he would need to liquidate everything he owned, convert every possession into currency, transform his entire material existence into the down payment for a dream. The calculations kept him awake at night, running through inventories of everything he possessed, the house his father had left him, the small plot of land he farmed, the tools and livestock and household goods that represented a lifetime of careful accumulation. All of it together might, just might, be enough to make the purchase possible. But the social cost of such a decision would be enormous. People would think he had lost his mind, selling everything he owned to buy a field with no obvious potential. Friends would express concern about his judgment. Neighbors would whisper about his sanity. Family members would stage interventions to prevent such an obviously foolish transaction. The seller himself would be suspicious. Who pays premium prices for mediocre land unless they know something others don't? The very enthusiasm he would need to show to make the purchase might trigger investigation, examination, the kind of attention that could lead to the discovery of what made this field so valuable. Yet with passing day, the necessity of action became more urgent. Every sunrise brought the possibility that someone else might discover what he had found, that his window of opportunity might close through no fault of his own. The treasure wouldn't wait indefinitely for him to overcome his fears and gather his courage. From that time on, he began the careful process of preparation. Subtle inquiries about selling his own property, quiet conversations with potential buyers, discreet meetings with those who dealt in land transactions. Each step took him further down a path that would be difficult to reverse, deeper into a commitment that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The arithmetic was brutal but undeniable. Everything he currently possessed, for the chance to possess something beyond his wildest dreams. Everything certain for something that seemed impossible. Everything he had worked to accumulate for something that had been given through pure grace, discovered through pure accident, offered through pure gift. The price was everything he had, but the treasure was worth everything he could ever hope to have. The calculation was both simple and complex, both obvious and mysterious, and with growing certainty he began to understand that the mathematics of the kingdom operated according to different principles than the economics of everyday life. Gradually, something fundamental shifted in how he saw the transaction unfolding before him. What had initially felt like devastating loss began to reveal itself as strategic exchange. What had seemed like sacrifice started to look like the most intelligent investment he could possibly make. The contrast between what he would give up and what he would gain became so stark that it changed the very meaning of the words cost and value. His house, which had once seemed like the foundation of his security, now appeared almost shabby when measured against the treasure hidden in that field. The land he farmed, which had represented stability and heritage, now felt like a burden when compared to the possibilities that lay buried beneath another man's soil. Everything he had called mine began to look temporary, provisional, almost illusory. Even so, the process of recontextualization wasn't easy. Decades of conditioning had taught him to value what was visible, tangible, immediately useful. A house provided shelter, land provided income, tools enabled work. These were the practical realities that had shaped his understanding of worth. The treasure, for all its obvious value, remained hidden, theoretical, depended on faith rather than sight. But as days passed and the reality of his discovery settled deeper into his consciousness, a new kind of vision began to emerge. He started seeing his current possessions not as ends in themselves, but as means to a greater end, not as permanent assets, but as temporary currency that could be exchanged for something infinitely more valuable. The neighbors who would think him foolish for selling everything, they couldn't see what he had seen, couldn't know what he knew, couldn't understand that what looked like loss was actually the most profitable transaction in human history. Their concern came from blindness, their advice from ignorance, their warnings from inability to perceive treasure that remained invisible to their eyes. This realization brought unexpected freedom. For the first time in his life, he didn't need to make decisions based on what others would think or say. He had access to information they lacked, knowledge that rendered their opinions irrelevant. The treasure made him independent of social approval, liberated from the need to appear reasonable to those who couldn't see what made his choices so obviously correct. With this new perspective, the process of liquidation began to feel less like loss and more like liberation. Each possession he prepared to sell represented another step toward the treasure, another portion of the price he was gathering, another link in the chain that would bind him to the field where his future lay buried. The transformation wasn't just practical, but spiritual. He was learning to value the invisible over the visible, the promised over the possessed, the future over the present. He was discovering that true wealth might not consist in what you could see and touch, but in what you could trust and hope for. This insight changed everything about how he approached the transaction ahead. Instead of mourning what he would lose, he began celebrating what he would gain. Instead of counting the cost, he began calculating the profit. Instead of seeing sacrifice, he began recognizing the most intelligent decision of his entire life. It was then that the final piece of the puzzle fell into place, completing a picture that took his breath away with its beauty and perfect logic. The selling wasn't sacrifice at all. It was celebration. The liquidation wasn't loss. It was liberation. The apparent foolishness wasn't folly. It was the deepest wisdom he had ever encountered. Standing in his house and looking at the possessions he was preparing to sell, he felt something he had never expected. Pure, undiluted joy. Not the bitter satisfaction of someone making the best of a bad situation, not the grim determination of someone accepting necessary hardship, but the bubbling delight of someone who has discovered the deal of a lifetime. Consequently, every item he touched seemed to radiate possibility. The table where he ate his meals wasn't just furniture anymore, it was part of the treasure's purchase price. The tools he used for farming weren't just implements, they were keys to the kingdom. The very clothes on his back had been transformed into down payment for a future beyond his wildest dreams. He found himself humming while he worked, smiling at nothing in particular, laughing out loud when he contemplated the magnitude of what was about to happen. His neighbors, if they could see him now, would be more convinced than ever that he had lost his mind. But he knew better. He had found his mind, found his purpose, found the reason for his existence hidden in a field that no one else thought to explore. The joy was infectious, spilling over into every aspect of his life. Food tasted better because he ate it knowing that soon he would feast at a table paid for by treasure. Sleep came easier because his dreams were filled with visions of the life that awaited him after the transaction was complete. Even his work felt lighter because he knew it was temporary, soon to be replaced by the kind of existence he had never dared to imagine. This wasn't the desperate happiness of someone trying to convince himself that a bad decision was good. This was the deep, settled joy of someone who had stumbled upon a secret that changed everything, who had discovered that the kingdom operated according to principles that made ordinary economics look absurd. The treasure hadn't just given him wealth, it had given him a new way of seeing, a new way of valuing, a new way of being in the world. He was learning what it meant to make decisions based on hidden realities rather than visible circumstances, to choose the eternal over the temporal, to prefer the substantial over the superficial. Since that revelation, the entire process of selling and buying had been transformed from burden to blessing, from necessary evil to unimaginable privilege. He wasn't losing everything. He was investing everything in the only thing that truly mattered. He wasn't sacrificing his future. He was securing it in the most dramatic way possible. The laughter that bubbled up from his chest was the laughter of someone who had discovered that the universe was far more generous than he had ever suspected. That treasure was far more accessible than he had ever imagined, and that joy was far more available than he had ever dared to hope. Later, when the euphoria of discovery had settled into studied determination, the moment of final commitment arrived like dawn breaking over mountains, inevitable, transformative, beautiful in its clarity. He would sell everything he possessed, liquidate every asset, convert every belonging into the currency needed to purchase that field and claim the treasure that would redefine his existence. The decision, when it finally crystallized, felt both momentous and natural, both terrifying and peaceful. This was what he had been moving toward since the moment he first stumbled across that hidden chest, the logic and conclusion of every prayer he had never quite known how to pray. The answer to every restless yearning that had driven him from his comfortable routines. However, making the decision and implementing it were different challenges entirely. The practical mechanics of liquidation would require careful planning, strategic timing, and diplomatic negotiation with buyers who wouldn't understand his urgency. He couldn't appear desperate without raising questions, couldn't seem too eager without arousing suspicion. The house would be first, his childhood home, the place where his parents had raised him, where he had learned to walk and talk and dream. Selling it would signal to everyone that something fundamental had changed in his life, that he was no longer the stable, predictable person they had always known. The questions would begin immediately. Why? Where will you live? Have you lost your mind? His livestock would follow. The sheep and goats that had provided steady income, the oxen that had pulled his plow, the donkeys that had carried his burdens. Each animal represented the tools and equipment accumulated over years of farming would need buyers too. Implements chosen with care, maintained with diligence, essential to the work that had defined his identity. Selling them would be like selling pieces of himself, admitting that the person he had been was dissolving to make room for someone entirely new. From there, even his personal possessions would need to be converted to currency. Furniture crafted by his father, dishes inherited from his mother, books collected over years of learning, clothes tailored to his measurements. Everything would have to go. Everything would have to be sacrificed on the altar of this impossible dream. Yet, with each item he identified for sale, his excitement grew rather than diminish. These weren't losses, they were investments. These weren't endings, they were beginnings. These weren't sacrifices, they were down payments on a future so bright it made everything else look dim by comparison. The arithmetic was still staggering, the social costs still enormous, the practical challenges still daunting. But the decision was made, irrevocably and joyfully made. He would sell everything to buy the field. He would trade everything visible for something invisible. He would risk everything certain for something that seemed impossible. Through the streets of the city, news of his selling spree spread like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. People gathered in doorways and marketplaces, whispering about the man who had apparently lost his mind, who was liquidating a lifetime of careful accumulation for no reason anyone could understand. The speculation grew wilder with each retelling. Debt, disease, demons, a dozen different theories to explain the inexplicable. The buyers came, drawn by rumors of a motivated seller willing to accept reasonable offers for quality goods. His house attracted several interested parties: farmers looking to expand their holdings, merchants seeking investment property, families needing more space. The bidding was competitive, though everyone sensed his urgency and adjusted their offers accordingly. Even so, he found himself strangely calm in the midst of the chaos he had created. Let them whisper, let them speculate, let them think what they would think. None of them had seen what he had seen. None of them knew what he knew. None of them understood that he wasn't losing his mind, but finally finding it. The negotiations were delicate, requiring him to balance urgency with discretion, need with dignity. He couldn't appear too desperate without inviting exploitation, couldn't seem too eager without raising questions about his motives. Each transaction was a careful dance between seller and buyer, each conversation a masterpiece of misdirection and controlled revelation. His family members arrived to stage intervention, convinced that grief or illness or some other tragedy had clouded his judgment. Think about what you're doing, they pleaded. Consider the consequences. Where will you live? How will you support yourself? What happens if this plan of yours doesn't work out? Their concern was genuine, their love unmistakable, their inability to understand heartbreaking. The hardest part was maintaining his secret while reassuring people who cared about him that he hadn't completely lost touch with reality. He wanted to tell them about the treasure, wanted to share the joy that made every sacrifice feel like celebration, wanted them to understand that he wasn't destroying his life, but saving it. But the secret was too precious to risk, the treasure too valuable to expose. From that point, the momentum became unstoppable. Each sale enabled the next. Each transaction brought him closer to the total amount needed to purchase the field. His possessions flowed out like water, converted to currency that accumulated in carefully hidden caches, transformed from things and to the means to acquire the only thing that truly mattered. The day of the final sale, the livestock that represented his last major assets brought a mixture of sadness and exhilaration. He was saying goodbye to the last vestiges of his old life, searing the final connections to his previous identity. Tomorrow, he would be a different man entirely, a man with nothing but hope and everything to gain. Standing in the empty rooms of his sold house, surrounded by buyers collecting their purchases, he felt like someone standing on the shore of a vast ocean, preparing to set sail for undiscovered countries. Behind him lay everything familiar and safe. Ahead lay everything unknown and wonderful. The purchase of the field would happen soon now, perhaps within days. The seller had agreed to terms, the price had been negotiated, the contracts were being prepared. Soon, very soon, the treasure would legally belong to him, and the transformation from ordinary man to extraordinary death digging would be complete. Finally, the moment arrived with all the ceremony and significance he had imagined, yet somehow felt more real and more impossible than any of his anticipations. The papers were signed, the money exchanged, the deed transferred from the previous owner to his own trembling hands. The field was his. The treasure was his. The future he had dreamed was no longer dream, but reality. Standing on soil that now belonged to him, he felt the weight of transformation settling over him like a cloak. This ground, which had seemed so ordinary when he first wandered across it, now represented the most valuable real estate in the known world. Somewhere beneath his feet lay wealth beyond calculation, security beyond measure, possibility beyond imagination. Thus, the first thing he did was walk the boundaries of his new property, pacing off every inch of land that now carried his name on the legal documents. Each step was a prayer of thanksgiving, each breath a celebration of grace, each heartbeat a rhythm of joy that threatened to overwhelm him with its intensity. The previous owner had departed with obvious satisfaction, pleased to have found such an eager buyer for land that had never been particularly productive. If he wondered why someone would pay such a premium for such ordinary soil, he kept his questions to himself, content with the unexpected windfall that would allow him to pursue opportunities elsewhere. The neighbors watched from their own fields, probably wondering what the new owner planned to do with land that had never supported more than modest crops. Would he try irrigation, different plantings, some innovative farming technique that justified the apparently inflated price he had paid? Their curiosity was natural, their speculation harmless, their ignorance complete. But he had no intention of farming this field in any conventional sense. This wasn't agricultural investment, but treasure recovery, not crop planning, but claim staking. The real value lay not in what could be grown on the surface, but in what had been waiting beneath it, hidden but not lost, secret but not forgotten. The treasure chest, still buried where he had found it, called to him like a voice he could hear with his heart rather than his ears. Soon, perhaps even today, he would uncover it completely, would claim openly what he had discovered secretly, would possess legally what he had found accidentally. As sunset approached on his first day as landowner, he made his way to the spot where his future lay buried. The soil looked undisturbed, his careful camouflage successful in preventing discovery by others. But now there was no need for secrecy, no reason for concealment. This was his field, his discovery, his treasure. The digging went faster this time, fueled by ownership rather than fear, by joy rather than anxiety. Each shovelful of earth brought him closer to the moment when possibility would become reality, when faith would become sight, when the treasure would finally be his to hold, to count, to use for the purposes that had been growing in his heart since the moment of first discovery. With this legal possession, the last barrier between him and his destiny dissolved. The field was conquered, the treasure was accessible, the transformation was complete. Everything he had hoped for, everything he had sacrificed for, everything he had believed for was about to be confirmed in the most tangible way possible. 3 years had passed since that ordinary afternoon when his foot caught on extraordinary treasure, and the transformation was so complete that sometimes he could barely remember the man he used to be. The emptiness that had once defined his existence seemed like a half-remembered dream, a story someone else had told him about a life he had never actually lived. The morning sun rolled over fields that now stretched beyond the original discovery site. He had been able to purchase neighboring properties, to expand his holdings, to become the kind of landowner he had never imagined becoming. But more than that, he had become the kind of person he had never imagined being, purposeful, joyful, deeply satisfied with a life that felt full of meaning. Therefore, when people asked him about his dramatic transformation, as they inevitably did, he found it difficult to explain in terms they could understand. How do you describe the difference between existing and living to someone who has never experienced both? How do you convey the weight of purpose to someone still wandering through emptiness? The treasure itself had been even more valuable than he had dared to hope. Ancient coins, precious metals, jewelry crafted by masters whose names were lost to history. The cash had provided not just immediate wealth, but ongoing income, not just security, but the means to pursue dreams he had never allowed himself to dream. But the real treasure he had discovered wasn't the gold and silver and precious stones. The real treasure was the transformation itself. The movement from emptiness to fullness, from routine to purpose, from existence to life. The material wealth was wonderful, but the spiritual wealth was revolutionary. His relationships had changed too. The people who had worried about his sanity when he sold everything now sought his advice about investments. The neighbors who whispered about his foolishness now asked about his success. The family members who had staged interventions now celebrated his vindication. Yet he found that his closest friends were now those who understood something about hidden treasure themselves, people who had discovered that the kingdom operated according to different principles than the world imagined, who had learned that the most valuable things were often invisible to casual observation. The field itself had become more than property. It had become a symbol, a reminder, a daily confirmation that the universe was more generous than anyone dared to hope. Every morning when he walked across his land, he remembered the stumble that had changed everything, the moment when ordinary became extraordinary. It had been preparation. The restlessness hadn't been punishment. It had been guidance. The wandering hadn't been aimless. It had been directed toward this field, this treasure, this transformation. Since then, he had become something he had never expected to become, a living testimony to the reality of hidden treasure, a walking example of what happens when someone is willing to trade everything visible for something invisible, everything certain for something that seems impossible. The vow he had made that first night to sell everything, risk everything, sacrifice everything for the sake of the treasure, now seemed the most reasonable decision in human history. He had given up a life that felt empty and received a life that overflowed with purpose. He had traded existence for life, routine for adventure, emptiness for the kind of fullness that made every day feel like celebration.